They say the desert remembers. Every footprint pressed into its red sand, every whisper carried by the night wind, every shadow that lingers too long, none of it is ever truly gone. Out here, in the vast silence of the American Southwest, stories don't fade away. They wait, they watch, and sometimes they return. Most will tell you these are only legends, Navajo tales told to keep children close to the fire. But listen closely, and you'll realize something older, darker, moves beneath the surface. This land is not empty. It is alive with memory, and those memories wear faces, some human, some not. You might have heard of ghosts, spirits, demons, stories we convince ourselves we understand. But the desert holds a secret that doesn't fit neatly into any of those boxes. Not a phantom you can pray away, not an animal you can trap. It is something far more unsettling, a presence that crosses the boundary between man and beast, between sacred and cursed. A presence that looks back at you from the darkness and leaves you wondering if it was ever human at all. The elders speak of it only in hushed tones. Travelers swear they've seen figures that shouldn't exist, shapes moving like wolves, but with the posture of men. Hunters have followed paw prints across the dunes, only to watch them shift into bare human footprints before their eyes. And on the loneliest nights, when the wind falls silent and the coyotes refuse to howl, a laugh, half human, half animal, echoes through the canyon walls. Those who hear it never forget it. Tonight, we don't chase fairy tales. We follow evidence, stories rooted in blood, in loss, in moments too specific, too consistent, to dismiss as imagination. The line between myth and truth is not as wide as you think, and when you hear what comes next, you may find that line vanishing beneath your feet. This is not just a tale told for fear, it is a warning carved into the bones of the desert, whispered across generations. Step carefully, because once you enter this story, you will carry it with you. Every rustle in the dark, every shadow outside your window will feel just a little too close. Our story is titled The Curse of the Desert Wolf. The desert had gone silent that night. Thomas Begay, a seasoned shepherd of the Navajo Nation, knew the language of the desert well. The coyotes should have sung in the distance, owls should have called from the cliffs, and the restless winds should have carried their voices across the canyons. Yet that night, nothing moved. The silence pressed against him like a heavy shroud. His lantern shook as he lowered it toward the sand. At first, he saw the deep, familiar prints of a wolf, four-toed, sharp, undeniable. But only a few paces ahead, the trail shifted. The paws stretched unnaturally long, twisting as though the sand itself resisted the weight pressing down. And then, impossibly, they became something else. Bare human footprints, wide claw-like toes splayed across the red earth. Thomas froze. Every story he had been told as a child came rushing back. The warnings never to follow such tracks, never to speak the name of the creature that left them. Still, curiosity tugged at him. He stepped closer, and that was when he heard it. A howl rose from the canyon, but halfway through, it broke into laughter. A laugh that was wrong, human, yet not human, gleeful in its cruelty. The sound bounced through the rocks until Thomas could no longer tell if it came from ahead, behind, or above. The next morning, the village found him feverish, muttering in delirium. His sheep were dead, eyes wide with terror, but their bodies bore no wounds. Thomas whispered in Navajo that someone was wearing his brother's skin. For the outsiders who dismissed it as folklore, there was something unsettling to explain. In the 1800s, outbreaks of rabies swept through the Southwest, twisting the behavior of wolves and coyotes into frenzied, unnatural violence. Their howls cracked and warped into sounds that could almost resemble human cries. Some called it disease, Others called it proof. And there were stranger cases still. Doctors wrote of men convinced they were transforming into beasts, patients crawling on all fours, growling, even attacking livestock. It was called clinical lycanthropy, but to the Navajo, it was something else, the mark of a witch who had traded his humanity for forbidden power. When influenza struck in 1918, killing entire families overnight, many Navajo whispered that it was not chance nor sickness, but the work of a skinwalker passing silently through the Hogans, carrying death in its shadow. Science named it virus. Folklore named it curse. But the result was the same: bodies in the desert, and a fear that lingered for generations. And so the desert remembered Thomas Begay. The trail of wolf prints that turned into human feet was photographed, then sealed away, never shown again. Those who saw the evidence spoke of it only once before falling silent. Because everyone in the desert knows the first sign: animal tracks that end in bare human footprints, leading into the dark. The fever spread quickly through Thomas Begay's body. By the third night, he no longer recognized the faces that leaned over his bed. His lips cracked as he whispered in a hoarse voice that someone was outside, circling the Hogan. The family lit cedar wood, hoping the smoke would drive away what they feared, but the air felt heavy, as if the night itself pressed against the walls. Those who kept watch swore they heard footsteps pacing just beyond the door. At times it was the padding of paws, soft and deliberate. At other times it was the crunch of human feet against gravel. No one dared to look outside. They knew the stories. To meet its eyes was to invite the curse. Among the Navajo, it was said that a skinwalker was not born but made, crafted from betrayal. A man or woman who once studied as a healer, a medicine person, but had broken the sacred oath, twisting the songs and rituals into tools of death. The ultimate price was blood. To become one of the cursed, a person must take the life of their own kin. That act severed their place in the circle of family forever, and in exchange, the darkness gave them power, the ability to wear any skin, to run as beast or bird, to hunt in silence. Modern voices dismiss this as folklore, yet history leaves troubling parallels. In psychiatric records, those who murdered their own kin often developed what doctors called dissociative identities. Some claimed they could feel themselves becoming someone else entirely. One man in 1907 confessed that, after killing his brother, he woke at night convinced he was covered in fur, his hands clawed, his teeth sharper than before. Physicians called it psychosis. The Navajo had another word. Thomas's condition worsened. His fever should have burned him still, but instead he grew restless, trying to rise, muttering in half-lucid fragments that the thing outside wore a coyote's skin, that it wanted to trade places, that it was waiting for him to break. His sister clutched his hand, but he pulled away as if her touch burned. His eyes, once soft and familiar, now glimmered with something sharp and unfamiliar, as though a second soul pressed against the glass of his body, begging to get in. In the following days, others in the village began to fall ill. Not all showed the same symptoms, but the pattern was undeniable. Some grew pale and delirious, others heard voices calling their names at night, luring them out into the desert. The rational explanation might have been infection, perhaps influenza or encephalitis, both known to sweep through communities in sudden, merciless waves. But in the isolation of the canyon lands, no one saw microbes. What they saw were shadows that moved like men, yet not men, circling the Hogans until the dogs refused to bark. The elders whispered what no one wanted to admit. The curse spreads not only through blood, but through sight, through sound, through fear itself. To hear your name spoken in the voice of a loved one when you know they are asleep inside, that was enough to open the door. And once you opened the door, you invited it in. Thomas died before the week was over, though his body bore no wounds. His family buried him with cedar branches and white ash, praying that the earth would hold him. Yet the night after the burial, the same laugh was heard outside the village, that strange broken howl that mocked both beast and man. Some said the curse had taken him fully, others said it had only borrowed his skin. The desert remembers, and once a name is spoken by the skinwalker, it is never safe again. The night Thomas was laid into the earth, the village tried to believe it was finished. Ash had been scattered, prayers had been said, and the family sealed their doors with strips of juniper bark. But the desert does not surrender so easily. By the time the second moon rose, children whispered that they saw shapes moving just beyond the firelight, shapes that crouched too low for men, yet too tall for animals. The dogs, usually fierce guardians, refused to leave their kennels. They whimpered at the air as though something invisible pressed against their throats. That night, the first disappearance occurred. A young boy, barely 10, never returned from gathering wood at dusk. His mother swore she heard him calling from outside her door long after the search had begun. The voice was unmistakable, soft, tired, pleading to be let in. Yet when she opened the door, the yard was empty and the sand bore no prints. By dawn, another was missing. A hunter who had taken to the cliffs in hopes of tracking the creature never returned. All that was found was his rifle, resting against the stones, as though placed there carefully. Modern historians sometimes suggest these vanishings were the work of the wilderness itself. The desert is cruel, swallowing the lost with heat by day and cold by night. Yet the Navajo knew the signs. The sudden silence before each disappearance, the unnatural laughter that followed, and the lingering smell of decay carried on the wind. Anthropologists studying Navajo lore have recorded striking consistencies. Villagers describe voices calling in the tone of loved ones, a phenomenon modern psychology associates with auditory hallucinations brought on by sleep deprivation or encephalitis. In outbreaks of viral encephalitis, patients sometimes claim to hear voices or see figures standing at their doors. To the medical mind, it was illness. To the Navajo, it was proof that the skinwalker's curse could seep into the mind, bending perception until one could no longer trust their own family's voice. On the third night, panic spread. Entire households huddled together, refusing to sleep, listening for footsteps. Some said they heard nails scratching at their walls. Others swore they saw a pale face in the window, a face that smiled with the mouth of a stranger but the eyes of their kin. The disappearances left no trace, no blood, no struggle. It was as though the desert itself had claimed them. But in the hearts of the villagers, the truth was clear. A skinwalker does not kill as an animal kills. It takes. It borrows. It wears. And by the end of that week, 4 more names had vanished into the Red Canyons. None were seen again, save for their voices. Voices that came at night whispering at windows, begging to be let inside. By the 4th night, fear had become ritual. Families no longer slept in their own hogans but gathered together in the largest one near the edge of the canyon. They burned cedar branches until the smoke stung their eyes, whispering prayers older than memory. Outside, the desert stretched silent, as if holding its breath. It was near midnight when the sound came. At first it was a howl, low, steady, like a coyote announcing its territory, but then it bent, cracked, and broke into something else. A laugh. Long, ragged, and unmistakably human. It rose from the depths of the canyon and bounced between the stone walls, multiplied until it sounded as though dozens of voices were laughing at once. The villagers froze. Children clutched their mothers, dogs pressed flat against the ground, whining softly. No one moved until one of the younger men, desperate to prove his courage, slipped outside with a torch. He returned moments later, face pale, lips trembling, unable to speak. Only when pressed did he mutter what he had seen: a figure standing on the canyon ridge, too tall for a man, yet not quite animal, its limbs bent unnaturally, its head cocked at an angle as though studying him. And when the torchlight caught its eyes, they glowed, not with reflection like a coyote's, but with a deep, unnatural red that seemed to pulse like embers. The laughter erupted again, this time closer. Some swore it came from directly outside the Hogan walls. Yet when they looked, nothing stood there. The tracks in the sand told another story: paw prints that stopped just short of the entrance, shifting suddenly into bare human feet. In later years, anthropologists who interviewed survivors of these nights suggested the laughter was a form of pareidolia, the brain's tendency to impose meaning on ambiguous sounds. They argued that the echo of coyotes howling in narrow canyons could mimic the cadence of human voices. To the mind straining under fear and sleeplessness, the howl became a laugh. But the villagers disagreed. They pointed out that coyotes had vanished entirely from the area during those nights. The desert, usually alive with their cries, had gone silent. Something else was laughing, and it was not animal. That night, no one slept. The laughter returned again and again, circling the canyon like a predator toying with its prey. By dawn, the faces of the villagers were drawn, their eyes bloodshot. And though the sun rose golden over the sandstone cliffs, it brought no relief. For they now knew the curse was not merely a whisper, not merely a trick of the mind. It had a voice, a face, and a cruel joy in reminding them that they were never alone. The village no longer belonged to its people. By the fifth night, the land itself seemed poisoned. Sheep were found lying stiff in their pens, eyes glazed, bodies intact, but drained of life as if some invisible hand had pressed the breath from their lungs. Chickens stopped laying, dogs refused to eat, and the cornfields, green only days before, began to wither at the edges, leaves curling in upon themselves like burnt paper. The people fought back in every way they knew. Men stood watch on rooftops with rifles, their eyes scanning the dunes for movement. Women strung ropes of juniper and braided garlic above the doorways. The elders scattered white ash in circles around the Hogans, a line no evil spirit was supposed to cross. Yet every morning, the ash was disturbed, paw prints stamped into the line, and beside them, bare human feet. At first, the villagers told themselves it was coincidence, a trick of the desert wind. But then the voices came again, names called in the dark, imperfect imitation of lost children or dead brothers. Families huddled closer to the fire, afraid to open their doors even when the voices turned desperate, begging, weeping. Some tried to shoot at the shapes they thought they saw at the edge of the fields. Bullets cracked the night, but when torches were carried out, there was nothing, only sand shifting, as though something large had moved just beyond sight. Hunters swore their shots went straight through the creature. One even claimed the bullet had struck it square in the chest, yet the figure kept walking, slower now, almost mocking, before melting back into the night. Doctors years later would describe this as mass hysteria, pointing to cases where fear spread faster than disease. They noted how prolonged terror could mimic symptoms of illness, weakened immune systems, hallucinations, sudden death from stress. Yet the livestock deaths remained unexplained. No wounds, no signs of illness, only the eerie stillness of animals that seemed to have surrendered to something unseen. In one account preserved by anthropologists, a farmer reported that his cow, healthy at dusk, was dead by dawn. Its eyes were wide, blood vessels burst, tongue swollen as if strangled by invisible hands. Such details were catalogued in hushed margins, never printed widely, as though scholars feared acknowledging what the Navajo had always known: The skinwalker was not bound by the rules of predators or plague. That night, laughter returned, circling the canyon like a storm. It moved from one side to another with unnatural speed, echoing so perfectly that no one could say how many voices there were. Some swore they saw torches flaring on the ridge, as though dozens of figures watched from above. The village was no longer just haunted, it was besieged. Every ritual, every bullet, every whispered prayer felt like a game to the thing outside. It was not trying to break in. It was waiting, circling, wearing them down until fear itself opened the door. And in the darkness between each mocking laugh, every man, woman, and child felt the same truth. The skinwalker was already among them. By the sixth night, the silence of the desert had become unbearable. The villagers no longer feared the dark itself, they feared the voices that broke it. It began with a knock, gentle, almost polite, against the wooden door of a hogan. A mother froze as she heard her daughter's voice outside, sweet and trembling. "Amma, it's me. Let me in. I'm cold." Her daughter, however, lay asleep beside her, breathing softly beneath a blanket. The mother bit her tongue until it bled, too afraid to speak, too afraid to answer. Elsewhere, a man swore he heard his dead brother calling from beyond the cornfield. The voice was exact. Tone, rhythm, even the old habit of dragging out certain words. He followed it to the edge of the field, torch shaking in his hand. Only when the flame flickered across the stalks did he realize he stood alone, the voice echoing still, though his brother had been in the ground for 5 years. The Navajo had long warned of this. Skinwalkers do not merely take the form of beasts, they steal the voices of the familiar, weaving them into traps. To hear your name in the dark is to stand on the edge of damnation. Modern science has tried to explain this phenomenon. Psychologists speak of auditory hallucinations triggered by grief, fatigue, or fear. Studies of bereaved families reveal that up to 1/3 of people claim to hear the voices of their dead loved ones in the months after burial. In sleep-deprived states, the brain can manufacture sounds so convincing that even skeptics swear they are real. Yet none of these explanations account for what the villagers witnessed, multiple people hearing the same voice at the same time. On the seventh night, the voices multiplied. A child's laugh danced outside the hogan of the healer, followed by the deep baritone of his long-dead father. Across the village, 2 women heard their mother singing an old lullaby outside the door, though their mother had been buried for decades. The voices grew bolder, closer, as if circling, testing the walls. One family broke. Convinced that their missing boy had returned, they unbarred the door. By dawn, the hogan was empty. The fire had burned out, the food left untouched, and the white ash circle was smeared with both paw prints and bare feet leading away into the desert. Anthropologists who recorded these stories argued that the disappearances could be explained by wanderings, families leaving in hysteria, driven to madness by fear. Yet the tracks in the ash contradicted them. To the villagers, the truth was undeniable. The skinwalker did not need to claw its way inside. It needed only a voice. The siege had turned intimate. It no longer prowled the edges of the fields. It was at the door, whispering in the voices of the people they loved most. And every villager knew the next name called could be theirs. The village had reached its breaking point. Doors were barred, fires burned low, and families huddled together in silence, waiting for the voices to return. But that night, instead of the hollow knock or the stolen laughter, another sound filled the largest hogan, the deep, rasping voice of Atsidi, the oldest elder still alive. He had been silent through the nights of terror, listening, watching, his blind eyes staring into the smoke. But now he spoke. "You think this is a beast," he whispered, his voice barely louder than the crackling cedar fire. It is not. A beast kills to eat. This feeds on something else. He turned his sightless eyes toward the frightened faces around him. It feeds on fear. It drinks it. And the more you give it, the stronger it becomes. The villagers listened, spellbound. The elder explained what few dared to repeat, that a skinwalker was once human, a witch who had severed himself from family by committing the unthinkable, taking the life of his own blood. That act tore the soul apart, leaving a hollow vessel that the darkness could enter. From then on, the skinwalker could wear any skin, mimic any voice, even steal the memories of the dead. But do not think it ends there, the old man said, his cracked hands gripping his cane. When you hear your name in the night, it is not only a trick, it is an invitation. If you answer, if you believe, you open the door. And once it is inside, you carry it in your bones, in your dreams, until one night you find yourself laughing in the canyon and you do not know why. The villagers shuddered. Centuries later, anthropologists would record similar warnings in hushed tones. Psychologists today might call it mass psychogenic illness, where fear spreads like contagion, shaping minds until whole communities share the same visions. Studies have shown that anxiety can pass from person to person almost like a virus, hearts racing in unison, hallucinations overlapping. Science names it contagion of fear. The Navajo had another word, skinwalker. The elder's revelation cut deeper. He spoke of those who believed they had seen the creature but survived, only to waste away in the weeks after. They lost weight rapidly, hair falling out, skin yellowing. Some claimed it was tuberculosis, others thought it was starvation. But the elder said it was something far worse. The skinwalker does not only wear skins, he told them, it wears lives, piece by piece. The fire snapped, throwing sparks against the smoke-darkened walls. Outside, the night remained silent, as if even the creature listened to the old man's words. You cannot kill it with bullets. You cannot chase it away with prayers spoken in fear, the elder finished. It was born of betrayal, and it can only be ended by sacrifice. That is the law of the curse. No one dared to ask what kind of sacrifice he meant, but in their hearts, they already knew. The younger men of the village could no longer sit idle. Each night they heard the voices. Each dawn they buried their animals or marked the vanishings of their neighbors. Fear had paralyzed the families, but anger still burned in the blood of the young. Against the warnings of the elder, 4 hunters gathered at dusk, rifles slung across their backs, charms of cedar ash tied around their wrists. They said they would end it. As the sun bled into the sandstone cliffs, they followed the tracks beyond the cornfields. At first, paw prints pressed clear into the dust, but within a mile the trail shifted, elongating until human footprints marched ahead of them, bare and deliberate. They tightened their grips on their rifles, forcing courage into their breath. The night came quickly, as it always does in the desert. Coyotes should have sung, but the land lay silent. Then, from the ridge above, came the laugh, long, broken, almost joyous. It echoed until the canyon itself seemed to sneer at them. One hunter raised his rifle and fired into the sound. The bullet rang sharp against the stone. The laughter did not stop. Moments later, the figure appeared. At first, a silhouette against the pale moon, long limbs bent at angles no man's body should bear. As it drew closer, they saw the head of a coyote stretched over shoulders that moved like a man's. Its eyes burned red, not with reflection, but with something alive, pulsing, as if coals smoldered in the sockets. The hunters fired. Once, twice. A volley split the night. The figure staggered, then straightened, stepping forward without slowing. They fired again, bullets kicking up sand and sparks from the stone. The thing laughed louder. One of the hunters swore the bullet had passed straight through, the figure dissolving for a moment like smoke before taking form again. Later, doctors would call this target fixation, the brain under stress unable to process the truth of its aim. Soldiers in modern wars have described similar visions, bullets passing through enemies who should not have lived. Yet what all four men saw was the same: wounds that should have torn flesh, ignored as if the body were hollow. Panic broke them. They ran. In the scramble across the dunes, one man fell behind. His torch sputtered out, and his scream rose once, sharp and final, before cutting off into silence. The others did not stop to look back. When they returned at dawn, the village listened in horror. They found the hunter's rifle leaning against the cliffside, carefully placed, as though by steady hands. But no trace of the man remained, only paw prints leading away, transforming once more into bare human feet. The elder shook his head when he heard. "You cannot kill what is already dead," he muttered. "Bullets are for flesh. The skinwalker wears something else." That night the laughter came again, louder than ever, circling the Hogans. And to those who listened too long, it almost seemed like there were 5 voices now. For weeks the Begay family carried their grief in silence. Thomas's death had already left a shadow on their home, but it was his elder brother, Elias, who haunted them most. Years before, Elias had vanished into the desert after a bitter quarrel. Some said he had gone to live with outsiders. Others whispered that he had turned to forbidden paths. No one had spoken his name aloud since. But one night, when the laughter returned to the canyon, it carried with it something new, a word, a name, and the name was Elias. Thomas's sister gasped when she heard it. The voice that called from the ridge was warped, half human and half beast, but the name it spoke was clear. When the villagers turned to her, her eyes were full of tears. "It is him," she whispered. "It is my brother." That night she swore she saw his face. Not whole, not as she remembered, but stretched across the muzzle of something no longer human. The eyes glowed, yet deep within their ember-red shimmer, she thought she glimpsed the sorrow of a man. The elder nodded grimly when told. "Once blood is taken, there is no return," he said. "He killed what bound him to this world, and the darkness welcomed him in." In later decades, psychologists would call this projection, the mind grafting familiar features onto the unknown, making monsters into kin. In times of fear, they argued, villagers could imagine the face of a lost family member in shadows or flames. But the Begay family rejected such explanations. Too many had heard the name. Too many had seen the shape in the moonlight. The truth, to them, was simpler and more terrible. Elias had not died in the desert. He had become something else. The family's shame was whispered but never spoken aloud. Long ago, Elias had been training as a healer. He had known the sacred chants, the protective rituals, but he had also hungered for more. Rumors swirled that he had broken taboo, using songs meant for healing as curses, and when his own mother fell sick, some believed it was Elias who ended her life. To the Navajo, there was no darker crime. That act severed him from the family forever. Now his voice circled them each night, wearing their memories like a mask. He laughed with the tone of a brother, mocked with the cadence of a son. The skinwalker was not just a beast at their doors, it was their own blood returned in corrupted form. The next evening, when the voices came, they did not beg or plead, they accused. "You left me," it howled. "You abandoned me to the desert. Now I will wear you as you once wore me." The Begay family wept as they listened, for though they barred their doors and prayed for dawn, every one of them knew the truth. This was not a stranger's curse. It was the price of betrayal, written into their bloodline. And the skinwalker would never let them forget it. The villagers could no longer wait for dawn to save them. Too many had vanished. Too many voices haunted the night. And now, with the Begay family's secret laid bare, everyone knew the truth. The skinwalker carried the face of their own blood. So they turned to the oldest remedy they had left, the ritual of ash and fire. At dusk, the elders gathered in the center of the village. Men cut branches of cedar and piled them high. Women mixed white ash with sacred herbs and spread it in wide circles around the hogans. The air thickened with smoke, bitter and sharp, carrying chants that had not been spoken in generations. The villagers whispered each word with trembling lips, voices weaving together into a single plea for protection. Children were told not to look outside. Dogs were tied close, their howls joining the rhythm of the drums. The fire roared higher, flames licking the night sky, as the shaman began the chant of cleansing, calling upon holy fire to burn away the skin of the cursed. For a time, it seemed to work. The air grew heavy, and for the first night in weeks, no laughter echoed from the canyon. The villagers' voices grew stronger, emboldened by the silence. They believed the creature had retreated. Then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling just beyond the ring of ash. At first it was paws, padding softly. Then the sound shifted, unmistakably, into the tread of bare human feet. The circle of ash trembled, disturbed, as if something pressed against it, testing its strength. The shaman raised his arms and chanted louder. Sparks leapt from the fire, showering the villagers with light. For an instant they saw it, just beyond the flame. A tall, twisted figure, its body shifting between beast and man. The face stretched thin as parchment, glowing eyes fixed on them. And then it stepped forward. The ash line broke beneath its feet, scattered as though by an unseen wind. A scream tore from the crowd as the fire guttered, flames bending as if pulled by the creature's breath. Women clutched their children, men raised rifles, but the shaman cried out, "Do not break the circle!" His voice was drowned by the sudden roar of laughter, closer than it had ever been. Later, skeptics would suggest the wind had scattered the ash, that the smoke itself induced hallucinations in a village already on edge. In studies of enclosed spaces filled with carbon-rich smoke, researchers found that people often reported visions, voices, and even physical presences. But no scientific explanation could account for the fact that every witness described the same figure, standing at the same place, with the same burning eyes. The ritual had failed. Fire and ash, their oldest defenses, had been mocked and broken in an instant. And as the flames died low, the villagers realized something dreadful. The skinwalker was no longer outside. It was among them. The Begay family huddled in their hogan that night, cedar smoke burning in the small fire pit, the scent thick and bitter in their lungs. Outside, the desert had fallen into its terrible silence again. No dogs barked, no owls stirred, only the faint crunch of footsteps in the sand, pacing, circling, as if waiting. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps against the wooden door. Thomas's sister held her breath as a voice called softly, "It's me. Open." Her heart turned to stone. The voice belonged to her husband. But her husband sat beside her, clutching her hand so tightly, it hurt. The knock came again, more insistent. This time the voice was her own, repeating the same words in the same tone. "It's me. Open." The family clutched each other, paralyzed. Outside, the voice shifted again, deepening into the familiar timbre of their fathers, who had been buried years ago. The words were always the same, calm, patient, unyielding. "It's me. Open." Finally, unable to resist, the eldest son crawled toward the door, rifle in his shaking hands. He whispered a prayer as he peered through the small crack in the wood. What he saw nearly shattered his mind. Standing in the moonlight was himself, his own face, smiling faintly, eyes glowing red beneath the familiar features. The figure lifted a hand, his hand, and knocked once more, the smile widening. The son recoiled, falling back, the rifle clattering to the ground. His family dragged him away from the door as the voice outside laughed, a sound half human, half something else entirely. The knock turned into scratching, nails dragging down the wood, long and slow. Psychologists today might explain such a vision as a form of doppelganger hallucination, known in clinical studies as autoscopy. Patients under extreme duress sometimes report seeing doubles of themselves, even hearing their own voices spoken back to them. But the records from that night describe more than one witness. Everyone in the Hogan claimed to hear the same voice, to see the same face at the door. The scratching stopped. Silence pressed in once more. And then, faintly, the voice returned. Dozens of voices now, each belonging to someone they loved, each whispering the same words in unison. "It's me. Open." The family never opened the door. By dawn, the sand outside was disturbed with prints, wolf paws, human feet, and something in between. The wood of the door was scarred with deep grooves, as though clawed from both sides at once. That morning, the elder shook his head gravely. "It is not just wearing skins anymore," he said. "It is wearing souls." And the family understood the truth with a cold finality. The skinwalker no longer needed to hunt them. It only needed to wait until they mistook it for themselves. The village was unraveling. Families no longer trusted the night, and soon they no longer trusted each other. Every whisper sounded like imitation, every knock like a trick. Even within the safety of the Hogans, suspicion grew like rot in the beams of old wood. Among them was a man named Nez. He had lost 2 sons to the disappearances and claimed to have seen his wife's figure standing outside the cornfield even after she was buried. Grief had hollowed him, and fear had sharpened what remained. He spoke less each day, but his eyes wandered often to the canyon as if searching for something. One night, while the others kept their vigil, Nez slipped away. He was seen walking toward the ridge with no torch, no rifle, only a bundle clutched to his chest. By dawn he returned, his eyes strange, distant. When questioned, he said nothing. But soon after, the laughter in the canyon changed. It no longer mocked from a distance. It spoke names, precise, intimate, the names of every man, woman, and child in the village. Whispers spread. Nez had made a bargain. Folklore had long warned of such things. A skinwalker, once human, could speak to the desperate. It could promise protection in exchange for loyalty. And if one among the living accepted, the curse seeped deeper, threading itself through the entire community. The elders had feared this more than bullets or claws. The greatest danger was not the monster outside, it was the betrayal within. Modern historians might call this collective scapegoating. In times of terror, villages often accused one among them of conspiring with the darkness. But the records left by anthropologists complicate the picture. More than one witness swore they saw Nez walking at night beside a tall figure, its limbs shifting shape with each step. And when the footprints were found at dawn, they were not only his, they were paired with paw prints that transformed, once again, into bare feet. After that night, doors that had once held strong were found ajar by morning. Ash circles, once carefully drawn, were scattered, smeared as if by hands from within. The skinwalker no longer tested the village's defenses. It was being invited past them. The elder's warning now carried a sharper edge. "The curse spreads by fear, but it roots itself in betrayal," he said. "The moment one of us opens the way, the rest are already lost." And so, suspicion spread like fire in dry grass. Every face became a question, every silence a threat. In the stillness of the desert, they began to realize a darker truth. The skinwalker no longer had to wear skins. It was already wearing their trust. The decision was made at sunset. The villagers, worn thin by weeks of fear, gathered in the central clearing with arms full of cedar, sage, and dry brush. They would no longer wait in silence for the skinwalker to circle them. Tonight they would light the desert itself against it. By nightfall, more than a dozen fires burned bright across the canyon rim. Flames leapt high, orange and white, casting shadows that danced across the hogans. Smoke coiled into the black sky, carrying with it chants older than memory. The air throbbed with drums, a desperate rhythm to drive back the dark. For a time, the fire seemed to work. The voices stopped. The laughter stilled. Even the desert wind seemed to hesitate, trapped between the smoke and the flames. Families clutched each other, whispering that perhaps the old ways still held power. Then the smell came, a stench like rotting copper and burnt hair drifting with the smoke. The dogs began to howl, a long keening sound that cut through the chanting, and on the edge of the firelight, the figure appeared. At first it seemed a man. Then, with each flicker of flame, the body shifted. Shoulders stretched, limbs bent backwards, skin rippled as though struggling to contain what lay beneath. A face emerged from the shifting flesh, then another, dozens of faces flashing across its form, some familiar, some long dead. The villagers gasped as they recognized children, parents, brothers who had vanished, their features contorted in silent screams upon the creature's body. Its eyes burned brighter than the fire itself. Two coals, pulsing, alive, rifles cracked, arrows flew, the flames roared higher, and yet the figure walked forward, each step slow, deliberate, as if mocking the futility of their resistance. The bullets passed through it as though through smoke, sparking briefly before vanishing. The chants faltered as the villagers realized the truth. The fire revealed it, but could not burn it away. Later accounts would call this collective hallucination, a trick of exhaustion and smoke inhalation. In controlled studies, exposure to heavy cedar smoke has been shown to induce altered states of perception, but none of those studies could explain why dozens of people, from children to elders, describe the same thing: a figure wearing the skins of their dead, moving as one body stitched together by curse. The laughter returned then, booming, multiplied by the canyon walls until it shook the ground beneath their feet. Fires bent outward, sparks scattering into the sand as if repelled by the creature's breath. Men dropped their weapons. Women covered their children's eyes. The elder alone stood firm, his voice breaking through the chaos. "It cannot be killed by flame," he shouted. "Only by truth, only by sacrifice." The villagers looked on in horror as the skinwalker stopped just at the edge of the central fire, its shifting body illuminated in full. For the first time, every soul in the village saw its true form. And in that terrible moment, they understood. This was not just a beast wearing skins. This was their dead, their betrayed, their lost, stitched into one endless hunger. The flames cracked and spat but no longer gave warmth. Around the great fire, the villagers stood frozen, their eyes locked on the shifting figure. For the first time since the terror began, the laughter ceased. In its place came a voice. It was Elias. The sound was unmistakable, rough, broken, but still carrying the weight of memory. The Begay family fell to their knees as the creature stepped closer, its body settling, its many faces pulling back until only one remained. Elias's face, pale and stretched, eyes burning red yet glistening with something almost human. "You want the truth?" the voice rasped. "Then hear it." He confessed to what the elder had long suspected. Years ago, hungry for power, Elias had twisted the sacred songs he was taught. When his mother grew ill, He ended her life not with medicine, but with curse, feeding the darkness with blood of his own kin. That act tore him from the circle of family forever. I thought it was strength, Elias said, his voice echoing through the canyon. But it was only hunger. It never ends. You eat and eat. Flesh, blood, souls, and still the void grows deeper. I killed to live, and now I live only to kill. The villagers wept as his words crawled into them. He spoke of how the skinwalker curse was not a gift, but a prison. The more he fed, the more human he lost. The faces stitched into his flesh were not trophies, but chains, each one screaming inside him, never silent. Then he revealed the truth no one wanted to hear. The curse could not be destroyed. It could only be passed. There is no release except this, he said. When I lock eyes with you, when I tear your skin with mine, the hunger leaves me and enters you. That is the only way it ends. One of you must take it. One of you must wear me. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Children clung to their mothers. Men gripped their rifles, though they now hung heavy, useless. The elder closed his eyes, whispering prayers that faltered on his tongue. Modern psychologists, when presented these accounts, labeled them confabulation under duress, the brain of a grieving community inventing a narrative to explain tragedy. But buried in Navajo oral records are strikingly similar confessions, collected over centuries, men and women who admitted, before vanishing into the desert, that their power was not theirs to keep, that the curse always demanded a successor. As Elias's voice cracked, the laughter returned, softer now, as though mocking himself. He lifted his burning eyes to the villagers, his gaze sweeping over them like a predator choosing its prey. One of you will be next, he whispered, and when you are, you will beg for it to end, but it never will. The wind surged, scattering ash across the circle. The villagers stumbled back, horrified. For the first time, they realized the terrible choice before them: destroy their own kin and risk nothing changing, or let the curse pass into another life. The confession hung over the fire like smoke, and the night that followed would burn into memory forever. The fire was dying. The villagers' chants had grown thin, fractured by fear, and in the center of the circle, Elias, half man, half curse, stood grinning, his ember eyes searching for the next soul to inherit his hunger. It was then that Atsidi, Yazi, the elder, rose from the dust. His body was frail, bent, with years, but his voice cut through the terror like a blade. The curse cannot be passed if no one remains to carry it, he said. Then let it end with me. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but the elder raised his hand, silencing them. He walked slowly toward the fire, his cane dragging lines into the sand. With each step he sang, low, trembling notes of the old purification chant. The villagers joined, their voices hesitant at first, then stronger, as if clinging to the sound like a rope in the dark. Elias snarled, his body twisting, faces rippling across his skin. You cannot end it, he spat. You can only wear it. The elder stepped into the fire. Flames licked his clothes, but his chant did not falter. He scattered a pouch of sacred ash into the blaze, the smoke rising thick and white, choking the air. The skinwalker howled, its laughter breaking into a scream that shook the canyon walls. The villagers watched in horror as the elder's form blurred in the smoke, his song rising above the shrieks. He called upon fire to consume the curse, to bind it to ash, to leave nothing left to pass on. The flames roared, higher and higher, until they swallowed both man and monster in a storm of heat and sparks. For a heartbeat, the village was silent. Then the scream came, deeper, longer, not human, not animal, but something in between. It rose like a storm, then cut off, leaving only the crackle of dying fire. When the smoke cleared, the elder was gone. Elias was gone. All that remained was a ring of blackened earth and the faint smell of copper lingering in the air. Historians later dismissed this as allegory, saying the elder had likely died of natural causes around that time, and his sacrifice was a myth woven to explain his absence. Yet Navajo oral accounts preserve remarkable consistency, that an elder entered the fire to end a skinwalker's curse, and that for a time, the desert grew quiet. But the villagers knew better. The chant still echoed in their ears long after the flames had died. The elder had given his life to hold the curse at bay. And though the night was silent, no one celebrated. Because silence in the desert had never been safety. It had always been the sign that something still lingered, waiting. For many nights after the elder's sacrifice, the village lay in uneasy quiet. The laughter no longer circled the canyon, no voices called from beyond the doors. Families returned to their hogans, fields began to grow again, and the dogs, for the first time in weeks, dared to bark at the coyotes. But no one mistook this silence for peace. It was not the relief of safety. It was the hush that follows a storm, when the air is too heavy, too still, as though holding its breath. The Begay family mourned both their brother and the elder who had burned to save them. They told themselves the curse had ended. Yet sometimes, late at night, when the fire burned low, they swore they heard a whisper in the smoke, faint, almost tender. A laugh choked into silence, as if waiting for breath to return. Generations later, anthropologists recording Navajo oral traditions noted a striking pattern. Families who traced their lineage to the Begay clan often carried stories of shadows in the desert, of hearing their names spoken at night when no one was there. Some claim to see paw prints turning to human feet in the sand after storms. Scholars dismiss these accounts as cultural memory, trauma preserved through story, but the details were too precise, too persistent to be ignored. In medical journals, cases of shared hallucinations, folks seeing the same figure at the same time, are rare but documented. Yet no study has ever explained why entire families describe the same red eyes watching them from the canyon, or why disappearances in the desert so often carried the same marks: ash scattered, doors scratched, and no bodies found. The desert, they said, remembers. It remembers Elias. It remembers the laughter. It remembers the curse that fire could only silence, not destroy. And so, even now, when the moon rises full over the sandstone cliffs and the wind dies without warning, those who walk the canyon alone sometimes feel it, the prickle on the back of the neck, the sense of being followed. Some hear footsteps that change from paws to bare feet. Some hear their names whispered in familiar voices. And a few claim that, in the distance, they still hear laughter. The villagers are long gone. The elder's fire is only a circle of blackened stone. But the desert keeps every secret, every betrayal, every curse. The desert remembers, and it never forgets.